Hey guys, Ollie here. Today I want to dive into your relationship with food, understanding what are the three components that we see regularly coming up that make a really big difference with our long-term relationship with food, being able to feel good in our own skin, feel like when we look in the mirror we're proud of what we see, or we at least are able to feel good about it. I think there's a lot of avoidance of mirrors, there's a lot of guilt and shame around food, and it really detracts from an entire environment, from a social setting when we're going out to dinner, when we're choosing meals to eat, and really this disconnection from our body because we're really scared to feel a craving for certain foods because we're not able to make those certain adjustments of, firstly, what does it really mean, and secondly, how do we really feel in control of what that looks like. So if you're joining us live on the call, I'd love to get any questions or any comments below on what is your relationship with food right now. Maybe even rate it 1 to 5. What does that look like? If you just drop that in the comments below, I'd love to know where we can help you most on today's call, because this is a topic we see come through really regularly. Now, to walk you through this in a bit more of a breakdown, this was started with a mentor of mine, John Berardi. I've been through many of his stuff in the past, and this study was done through hundreds of thousands of clients, so a little bit more of a database than we currently have, but we see the same thing happen with our clients all of the time. And one of the troubles that you've likely seen on social media through Instagram and Facebook and TikTok or wherever you look at your stuff is everyone's focusing on what should I eat? What is that food? When really, if we look at the nutritional challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis to make sure that we stay on top of this long term, there's typically a lot more to go on there, right? And from this study that was done through hundreds of thousands of clients, the first one that came up was emotional and stress eating, right? Not far behind was things like lack of planning, cravings, snacking when not hungry, eating too quickly, and then a sweet tooth, right? So really that cravings component again. So these are aspects that I really want to address in today's call, keep it really short and sharp and make sure it's actionable for you, but just taking the time to look at with the data that we have on a day-to-day basis and ultimately how we've built our program to make sure that it works in a real world setting, not just this is the exact meals that you should eat and you should eat like a robot. It's taking the time to really take in consideration the human, the lifestyle, the behavioral element that we really deal with on a day-to-day basis. So if you are someone who feels that you've been through all the diets, you feel that you've got a real resistance, guilt or shame or worry around certain foods, you're not quite sure anymore what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating, what foods you feel best on, or even just understanding how to feel good in your own skin. Maybe you're just constantly exhausted and always tired. I'd really like to address that and make sure that we can dive into areas of that today. So the 3 steps I really want to dive into today is first understanding our chemical needs, coming right down to a cellular level, what's really going on and why is our body got these cravings, this need from an emotional standpoint to eat. The second one, we're going to dive into your labels of food. That really matters, and understanding, potentially picking ourselves up on the words we're using around food. And then lastly, our emotional response, right? Taking into account the relationship with food directly around the emotions tied to food or associated with food. Now, a really important point to bring up here is understanding that it really is not your fault, right? We've been programmed at such an early age to seek something external to fix us, right? We take the painkiller because our back hurts. We take the heartburn pill rather than taking the time to slow down to eat. We get drunk rather than facing our emotions. We see this all the time. We watch TV to block out the world rather than really breathing and taking the time to de-stress. And we avoid the hard conversations either with ourselves or others and find a way to just continue to move forward, right? The biggest decision we seem to be making in this age is indecision. Taking the time to really lock into one decision and moving forward, I think would make a really big difference in itself, but that's a conversation for another day. So where I want to start is on this chemical component, and really understanding deeper down at a neurotransmitter level is understanding a little bit of a difference between both serotonin and dopamine. Okay, hopefully you've heard of these neurotransmitters. Both of them tend to be associated with certain things. So dopamine's a real learning, motivation driver, whereas serotonin seems to be more of a long-term commitment, a contentment sort of level of feeling nice long-term. It's not high level excitatory and feeling amazing, but it's just a low level of really nice mood, feeling good and calm through that period. So knowing that there's 2 neurotransmitters there that we are really taking into account, there's obviously more, but these are the ones that I want to focus on today, is when we look at something like serotonin, 90% of this is made in our gut, which we've talked about plenty of times in training. So taking the time to look at the spiral effect of if you eat lots of sugars, lots of low quality foods, you'll likely find that it's very hard to regulate, a high happy mood through the day. You tend to notice that your mood is lower also, not to mention your sleep and other functions in the body as well. Whereas dopamine really seems to be something that we're constantly seeking at a very primal level. Our body is made to seek that dopamine, right? Dopamine, that high level drive, motivation, short spikes to really make things happen. The trouble is, and you see this a lot in the space of acting, in the space of performing, where people are in really high dopamine areas where they just feel fully alive. If they're daredevils that are jumping out of planes, skydiving or bungee jumping or whatever that might be, you get a really, really high dopamine hit in that moment. But when it goes up, what goes up must come down. But the trouble with something like dopamine is it doesn't just come back down to baseline. It will go up, it will go below baseline, and then over time it will build back up to a new norm. So if you're constantly seeking the dopamine, then you go up and you'll notice that you get lower and lower and lower to the point that you no longer feel like you can feel excitement because you've got a level of, in a way, dopamine resistance where your body is really not in a position that can seek those high levels of dopamine. Okay, so we notice this a lot in those adrenaline sports, but you also notice it more and more in that space where there's a lot of sugars coming through as well. All right, and that's really where, if we take a quick look at this picture, there's a lot of colors. Straight away our body associates certain flavors with these foods and we start to salivate, right? I certainly am. I'm a bit of a sweet tooth. That top left-hand corner of all the bodies, I could demolish that. I know I'd feel terrible afterwards, but there's a natural instinct to want to eat those foods, right? There's so much colors and flavors that are brought into that. And there's a dopamine response that our body's naturally seeking when we start to have those foods, right? Now, a really, really important part, and this quote was brought through by Mandy, who's one of our clinical nutritionists inside of the Meta Project, that I really thought was a great thing I wanted to add in here, which is if you eat boring food, your brain will find a way to eat something else. If you're constantly looking at your healthy option, right, your chicken salad as a really bland food, you've just got some green leaves and some dry chicken, you can have as much willpower and discipline as you like. Eventually, your body will find a way to eat something else, get a burger on the way home or make something else or not have the time to cook that meal. Just reinforce being able to eat something else. Because if we don't get stimulus from our meals and actually enjoy those meals, our body will naturally seek that stimulus somewhere else. So we need to find that space of creating stimulus around our meals, enjoying our meals, so we can create a positive association with eating healthy. Because if there's healthy and boring over here and exciting and unhealthy over here, we're going to eat the unhealthy thing more and more times and we're going to beat ourselves up for it. So being able to simply look at our association of those foods has to be a place to look at. And we spend a lot of time looking at healthy, simple, tasty recipes for our clients to make sure it's not just here's your chicken and broccoli, but here's that taste, here's that vibrancy back to your meals to make a real difference. So the concept that we're looking at here is something called post-ingested feedback, and it's a really, really interesting space where ultimately our body is seeking it's associated certain flavors with certain nutrients that the body needs. So they might get copper and magnesium out of a banana, they might get zinc and something else out of berries, right? There's certain nutrients that they know come from certain foods and certain sweetnesses, certain flavors. The trouble is we've got massive companies working to the point that we're artificially manipulating our taste buds to seek new things. So rather than seeking salt, we're now seeking chips. Rather than seeking the berries, we're now seeking chocolate, right? And we're starting to trick our body into craving these foods to get certain nutrients. And it comes back to that mentality of we're over-consuming yet we're undernourished. We're eating all of the foods, but they contain no nutrient-dense components, right? So we continue to eat and our body continues to eat until it finally gets the nutrients that were never there in the first place. And this is really where we get into the space of overeating, binging, and getting to the point that we just can't stop ourselves from finishing the container, right? The classic Pringles effect. As soon as we start, we can never finish. So the next one I want to dive into here is number two, which is your awareness of the words you use around food. Now, if you're in a space that you've done these diets before, you've put yourself in restrictive plans, this is typically something that we really need to work on, right? If you look on the left-hand column, we tend to be in a space where we're focused on the good and the bad, the healthy, the unhealthy, the sugary, the fattening, the cheat days, the free calories. It becomes very binary, right? It's either good or it's bad. There's nothing in between. And that's really something that we need to start to address. So there's a slightly better version, which is there's a bit of a splurge, there's nutrients, there's fast foods, there's nourishing, there's something to avoid, there's macros, calories, moderation. That's starting to get much, much better. But if we can really go to the green, which is, hey, I'm going to eat less of these things because they don't help, and I'm going to eat more of these things because they do help, or they feel good when I eat them. And it really allows you to go from more of a binary good or bad to more of a spectrum. If I eat more of these foods, I feel better. If I eat less of these foods, I feel better. So taking the time to look at that space of just awareness around certain foods. No one food, provided it's cooked, is going to be drastically problematic by itself. Having one beer is not going to be problematic, but if your one beer is your trigger to now have 12, well, that's something we need to now address, because we need to get away from this binary. It's either good or bad. It's either helpful or it's unhelpful, and allows us to really work with our body, knowing that if we've had one, we can certainly make some adjustments to feel good again, and use that data to adjust rather than going from good, bad, and really not knowing if there's anything in between. Right? This goes a little bit deeper when we start to look at the words that really truly matter here, right? The difference between I have to versus I get to, we see all of the time. If you're doing the exercise because you have to, you'll find ways not to exercise. If you do it because you get to, you'll find opportunities to exercise everywhere, right? Something you enjoy now, something that you notice how much better you show up on a day-to-day basis because of. If it's something I must do, this creates a or else situation. If I don't achieve this in 10 weeks, what happens? Well, usually nothing, but we just create a whole lot of stress about arbitrary goals that we've set for ourselves, or we're put in a challenge or whatever it might be. Taking the time to get rid of these musts and just start to be part of this curious exploration of how I can make myself better or worse, and make those decisions from there. We go really, really deep with our clients to understand the difference between this is a food that you'll likely feel worst on, but it's totally up to you whether you want to eat it. Right? It's like telling a child, if the stove is hot, you can touch it, but it will be hot and it will burn your hand. And it makes a really, really big difference, because if I say you cannot have ice cream, or if you tell me to not have ice cream, we create a rubber band effect that says, I really want ice cream now because I can't have it. Whereas I say, hey, you can have ice cream, but that's why your face is puffy, that's why you're bloated, that's why you're not sleeping well, that's why your breathing's impacted. So I would like you to have that a little bit less. Then you can start to look at that space of, well, I know I feel better when I don't have it, so I'm going to have it less often, right? It's a really, really important space to be in to start to create a better relationship with food, one, but two, also understand what your body's really after, what it's craving, what it's looking for. Really, really important point. This goes a little bit deeper as well. This goes very deep. I think Big Pharma do this very well, right? You have a certain condition, you have this problem, so this is your fix in this fancy new pill. We can use that to be a good thing or a bad thing, right? If you say you're not a morning person, my response is going to be, would you like to be? Or if you're angry, it's taking the time to look at, are you an angry person, or are you simply feeling anger? Are you a sad person, or are you just feeling sad? We can go one layer deeper and realize that, hey, sad and happy are both emotions you're always going to feel. They're neither bad nor good. But if you start to be sad about being sad, you'll be more sad. This can be something that really is self-perpetuating, right? So taking the time to look at these words and understand what you're forcing yourself to do, but you really don't have to, is a really, really good place to start. Hopefully that's landing for you guys. The last one that we go through here, number 3, is this emotional eating. Really starting to associate our emotions with food, or understanding why it's really here. So if you're watching or listening along to this one, I want you to ask these questions. So if you can pay attention to this one, the first question is, what does food do for you? Just ask, what's the first couple of things that come into your head? What does food do for you? If you're watching this live, you can comment in the chat below. I'd love to see where this comes through for you. What does food do for you? So potentially it could be fuel, it could be energy, it could be sluggishness, it could be guilt, right? What are those things that initially come to the surface for you? The second one that comes through is, what areas of your life cause you stress? So this is not necessarily food directly, but I'll bring it back to it. What areas of life cause you stress? So we may look at your work, we could look at when the kids do something, when we're late, when the project's overdue, whatever that might be. The third one that we look at here is, what do we eat when you're stressed? Does it change, right? Do we look for the sugary foods? Do we look for the savory foods? Do we look for the salty foods? Do we look for certain fizzy drinks? What are those foods that we tend to look at when we're stressed? Do our options change? Or do we make sure that, hey, now that I'm stressed, I need to make sure that my food is really on point so I can be more resilient to this spot. All right, big shift. The fourth one that we go through here is describing your connection of guilt and shame. How do you hold on to it? Right? Is this something that you really internalize? Are you talking to yourself in a way that you would never talk to anyone else? Or are you talking to yourself like an old friend? Right? Really, really big difference. Is this something that you're telling yourself all those words that you'd never want to wish on anyone and really beating yourself down for it? Or are you bringing some level of compassion to how you feel after a certain food? And hey, that didn't feel so good. Maybe I'm going to try something different next time. Right? Making those shifts really, really make a difference. So if we did notice that in some of those answers, when we were stressed, when there was guilt or shame, how could we replace this? What could I replace it with from a food standpoint or from a stress standpoint? What could I replace it with? When I get stressed, I'm going to remember to take 5 deep breaths. So I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to have a drink of water first. I'm going to create the 10-second rule. I'm going to sit with it for just a little bit longer before I decide to fix it with food. What can I replace that with? One thing that we see a lot with alcohol consumption, whether we see with the sugary foods, is ultimately that replacement, because our body still wants something in that moment. And I think rather than just removing it entirely, which you can do, but it's coming back to willpower and trying to do everything 100% from the start, which we see a lot, right? All or nothing. Taking the time to look at what's a small adjustment we can make in the right direction. So rather than having the full Coke, how could we bring it back to simply a soda or a sparkling water or a kombucha or whatever it might be, all right? So we're just bringing it towards more of a it's still a drink that it tastes good, that's beyond water, right? So then the last one here is, what would food look like without shame? Really, really important place, right? I'm going to give you a couple examples on this last one that I think are really important, right? So for me, what was food? What is now food? I think ones that I really like to look at is, one, it's fuel, right? It really fuels my day. It's enjoyment, right? There's certain foods I really do enjoy and I want to have on a social occasion. There's nourishment. I'm fueling my body from the training I'm doing, from the work I'm doing to make my brain work. There's really a nourishment component. There's time with family, friends, partners, whatever that might be. I think there's always a social element to this, and I think it's important to look at this when we start to look at some of the healthiest societies in the world. We look at Italy, we look at France. There's a massive social component to food, and really slowing down and being conscious of eating, chewing, and enjoying the food, I think, is important. We've all become very disengaged. And then lastly, guilt-free, right? Is this helpful for us? Is it unhelpful? But either way, it's data. It's something I'm going to learn from and make some of those shifts from there. So I think it's a really, really important space to work with. Hopefully this is something that was beneficial for you. I wanted to keep this relatively short and sharp, but I feel that this is such a crucial component of loving your journey again, bringing this from a place of self-compassion rather than something that's constantly beating ourselves down. Because at the end of the day, nutrition, food, this health pursuit in general should come from a place that enriches our lives, not detract from it. And if it's constantly something that you're fighting yourself to do, something that's making you feel horrible in the process, then ultimately it's not going to be something that we do long term. And that's not something that I wish on anyone. So taking the time to look at this long-term journey has to be something that you're doing to you, for you, not to you. I think it's a really, really important part of this process, being from a place of, I want to feel good in my own skin, so I'm going to make sure I start with my mental headspace and what I tell myself, because if I'm trying to do this force myself to do it over the 6-week period, and then I'll go back to my old ways, I personally feel like you're missing the point entirely. If you can't do it every day, why would you do it for one? If we can make those small shifts in a way that allows us to feel and look better and function better, and for the people around us to get a better version of us, that becomes a pursuit that I find a real positive association with, and that you want to continue to do it, because it just becomes who you are, becomes who you want to be. And when you're in that space, it becomes something that you find more opportunities, more possibilities to do it more often. If you are forcing it to happen and it has to happen, you'll find opportunities to not do it more often. All right, so hopefully today was helpful. It's an area that we see come through a lot, and we've helped thousands of clients with up until this point, and we really walk through every sequence of that mental chatter and that awareness of behavior design through your lifestyle and food, because I think that's really what becomes sustainable and allows it to be a platform that's going to work with you for the rest of your life. So hopefully that gives you a really nice insight, something to work on right now. And if there's anything there that you'd like me to walk through in future, or you'd like us to work through your personal plan, your relationship with food, and how we can integrate you back in your day, no matter how chaotic it is, how exhausted you feel, how tired you feel, remember, when it comes from a level of self-compassion, you can find a way to fit you back in your day rather than simply forcing it to happen on top of everything else. Because when we have the energy, we have the focus, everything else is when we're more productive, we get more done, we feel more clear-headed, we're more resilient to stress, and we actually can get a lot more done in a week than we thought possible before. And we've seen it happen a lot of times. So hope you have an incredible week, team. That's my 2 cents, and we can talk again very soon. See ya. Bye.